council meeting for the City of Los Alamitos. Could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Edgar?
Here.
Councilmember Gross?
Here.
Councilmember Murphy?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Graham Mejia?
Here.
Mayor Kusamoto?
Here. Okay, so up on the agenda, the only item is the special orders of the day. It's the fiscal 2013-14 proposed budget follow-up, and we'll be talking, I guess, about the items from previous budget studies. City Manager?
Yes, I'll ask our finance director. He has a presentation. Josh?
Thank you. Good evening, council members, Honorable Mayor. Welcome to tonight's meeting for the follow-up items for our fiscal 2014 proposed budget. First, I'd just like to look at our budget calendar again. Our target for budget adoption is June 17th. There will be a public hearing that night, and staff will recommend the proposed budget for adoption. Tonight, 3 items we're going to talk about are more information on the part-time COLA, some more information on our business license position, the proposed upgrade from, or not upgrade, but conversion of 2 part-time positions to 1 full-time position, and then we looked at some costs for online payment software. And then also, I wanted to go into detail on our fund balance projection, and then also talk about a policy for fund balance in the future. So with that, we'll take a look at our part-time COLA. The part-time COLA is a 2.5% increase. It follows on the heels of the full-time employees increase that was just provided in April. It helps the city be more competitive recruiting and retaining part-timers. And we've reviewed the cost again and verified it would be $17,000 to cover increases for, there's 100 part-timers, and they work approximately 45,500 hours for us right now, every year. The second item, business license. This is where we wanted to convert 2 of our part-time receptionist positions to 1 full-time receptionist/business license clerk. This would provide a dedicated full-time person who could do the updating, reviewing, and follow-up of renewal notices, maintain our database, and then also begin to build institutional knowledge that they could carry over year after year. The position, the business license portion of the job is not envisioned to be full-time. It's seasonal and cyclical in nature. That's why it would be a /business license clerk or receptionist/business license clerk. We did review the online payment software with HDL. They're one of the companies that provide this service. This would really allow us only to accept payments online, and it would cost $20,000 to install and $5,000 a year in annual maintenance fees. This is part of our long-term strategic IT plan. Staff isn't recommending to move with this right at this moment. It doesn't address all of the needs that the full-time person, that we believe the full-time person could help with taking the ownership of that business license process. And the bottom, the third bullet, we just wanted to point out that this is a significant revenue source for the city at nearly $500,000 a year. Comes in at our 5th largest. On the next slide, we're going to look at some of the history of the business license tax. And we see a steep decline in 08-09. I've been talking to staff about what occurred there. We have a couple things. We lost our full-time person. We also were in the midst of the recession. And we can see that it jumped back up 22% once we realized what was going on here, and it's been steadily increasing year after year. But again, we would recommend that there be a full-time person to oversee this function.
2,000 businesses, correct?
Yeah, and there's roughly 2,000 business licenses issued each year. Some of those are out of city and some of those are in city. And then I wanted to go through, because I know there's been a lot of questions about fund balance, and I wanted to show what this proposed budget does to the projected fund balance. The first line, that's our operating and our surplus of $9,915. We had to move up to meet our 20% emergency contingency, 20% of estimated expenditures $40,000 came up here and has increased our emergency designation to $2,340,000. There's been no changes on the next two line items, workers' comp liability and GASB 45 OPEB designation. The pool, we're partly spending $40,000 that's already been set aside, and then $40,000 is being moved up from unassigned for a total of $80,000, and then that's projected to end at zero. Again, we're working right now with the Aquatics Foundation and attempting to get them to contribute to this, somewhere in the neighborhoods of $50,000, which would offset part of this fund balance spending. The Los Alamitos Boulevard rehab designation, we're projecting $100,000, leaving $100,000 for next year. The general plan update, $139,000. We're probably not going to need all of that based on our projections. So about $10,000 of that flows back in. That's what this number is here, this 141. Those are items that, I guess for lack of a better term, they're being released because the project has come to an end, and those are the funds that are left over. Same with our business and residential improvement program, $142,000. We're probably going to need anywhere from 10 to 20 of that. Right now, the projection is 10. So those two numbers are flowing down here as those two programs end. The Community Spending's Priorities Program stays at, or is at 358. This 14,000 represents a third of the 42,000 to be spent on parks programs. So this would be, if approved, this would be used for the next, this year and then, or the coming year and then 2 following years. So those are the line items. We notice we're actually cleaning up a lot of these. We're down to, we're eliminating 3 of these under this proposal. Unassigned fund balance we see was at 3.3 million because some of it got reassigned to unassigned, and then we're spending some fund balance here. I'll get into that in a moment. We are actually reducing unassigned fund balance by 133,000, total fund balance by just over $500,000, or just under 520,000. The 275, those items are the SRO, the pool repairs, the 40,000 that moved up here for emergency designation, and the emergency generator. So those are the items that are included in that. In your handout, there's a lot more detail on attachment 1. I couldn't fit that on this slide. So if you actually want to see the detail where it breaks out, salaries and benefits, maintenance and operations, that detail sheet mirrors this summary sheet. And so I'll move on, but if there's more questions, we can come, yeah.
Oh, just real quick, can you go over those amounts that were taken from the unassigned, the 40,000 for the emergency?
Yeah, 40,000 went to the emergency designation, 40,000 went to the pool, 95,000 for the SRO, and then 100,000 for the emergency generator. I have an Excel spreadsheet that I'll show you guys at the end that also has that on there,
Thank you.
just to make it a little clearer. And with that, I wanted to go over a fund balance policy that we'd like to propose. We don't have anything right now for when we have a surplus year, and this was just an idea that we had. I was talking with the city manager. 50% of any year, this would only be on a year we ended positively, where general fund balance actually grew, and it would be confirmed through our audit. And at that time, we would take half of that increase and put it into a separate capital improvement program fund. And then 25% of it we'd assign to our OPEB designation in the general fund, so it would stay in the general fund. And then 25% would remain in unassigned fund balance, which council could use in future years. We believe that this would help provide a policy and show where the priorities are for the city when there was a good year. And on the next slide, we're going to look at what would have happened had this policy been in place for the last 3 years. It's just a hypothetical, but it would show how it would work. These are the increases the general fund saw during the last 3 years, and this would have been the allocation of that amount. So half of it would have gone to a CIP fund, the other half would have remained in the general fund, but a quarter of it would have been OPEB and a quarter unsigned. So I just carried this all the way forward, and then down below I show the CIP fund would have been about just under 820,000, and the OPEB fund 659, The reason it grew quicker is because we already have 250 set aside in that designation, so the 409 would have added to that. This doesn't create any new monies or a new funding. It just sets a policy and tries to focus the money for future needs. It would have reduced our unassigned fund balance by about $1 million because this money would have been moved to different locations. But it doesn't change our operations. So I just wanted to point that out. And then with that, we can go back and go over any questions or concerns the council has.
Okay, anyone want to go first?
I'll go first.
You got the mic, you got a mic.
Sure. So just a question. So these three items that you covered, the COLA, or part-time employee, the fund balance, and the business license position, are those the only three open items that you show for this current budget?
I believe so, yes.
So of the two meetings we've had, May 6th and May 20th, you don't have anything you consider open at this point?
Not right now, no.
Okay, so at the highest level, before we get into the detail, the biggest concern that I definitely lodged earlier was that I thought that the revenue projections were overstated. So has there been anything distributed to convince us at this point that the revenue, because at this point, I think our revenue is overstated by about $305,000.
Right.
So, and I laid out specifically within property tax, fines and forfeitures, et cetera. I don't see any feedback on that. So you guys just must feel you're good to go, or maybe there's been something handed out that I haven't seen. I'm just trying to get a better idea of what the response was back from staff.
My notes reflect, and I found my notes. It said revenue over expenditures, estimated revenue, and that we were going to reevaluate and revisit all of these, and we did. And Josh and I talked about it extensively and talked about the trends and everything. We didn't know that we were to distribute paperwork, but we certainly could do that.
Okay.
And what the methodology was and everything, we didn't understand that. We just, that we were going to reevaluate it, and we did, but we'll be more than happy to distribute the detail on that.
Okay. So at this point, if I was a member of the public and I was just watching this from afar and I try to piece together what happened at our budget session, we've had issues in the past over meeting minutes. Now we're talking about the budget. I'm not sure we've closed the loop because I didn't leave that meeting convinced that we had answers to those questions. So I'm going to restate them one more time because I really want to try to get towards supporting this budget, but at this point I absolutely can't. The general fund revenue values that we talked about before specifically were the property tax amounts, about 100,000 overstated, and let me give you exact values here. Previous estimate to close 2.8 million, estimated forecast for the next year 3 million, so that's a $120,000 jump in property tax. It's a 4.1% increase. We've never had a 4.1% increase, and even when we were having significant decreases in the bad years, we never increased or decreased more than 2%, or about 2.1. So I'm still not comfortable with how we think property tax is going to shoot up right now in this economy.
We do hear that throughout Southern California that it is, so, but we'll revisit that certainly.
Okay, so that, and what I'm using is just for staff's purpose and the public is I'm looking at 4 years of actuals that were provided on the May 6th staff report on page 6. If I go also, and then I look at transient tax, that's the tax to our community that we gather through our 2 hotels. You will see that transient tax, or they call it transient occupancy tax, is 69,000, 80,000, 87, and it's supposed to be 90. Now we're bumping it up to 103,000. That's an 11.1% increase from what we think we're going to end this year. We've never increased or decreased more than 4 or 5% there. So either the rates must be going up. So the question, the action item to be fair was, what is going on with our 2 hotels? It seems like it'd be a pretty straight question. Our fees are tied to the rates, so have the rates increased? Because the occupancy number of hotel and beds have not. So I'm just trying to find out what would have been the increase in the revenue there. That's 10,000, that's not a lot, but it all adds up.
We'll address that.
Okay, the next one is the franchise fees. We had an amount, and you had explained that. I didn't have it in the notes, and I didn't have it in here, but I think that one was 25,000. It went from 627 to 651, but there was an explanation on the 25,000. I just don't remember what it was.
Well, the franchise, there's a number of different franchises, and I think they were moving in different directions, actually.
Yeah.
I can give you that information.
And intuitively, my question was, we voted on a telephone utility tax decrease of 1% in the last election. So I would expect directionally that, and that was 600,000 of the total franchise fees of totally for utility tax. So I'm just not sure how we have a pickup in that category of 25,000. I realize that there's 5 or 6 other areas for franchise fees, but I just wasn't sure how we net out at 25. License and permits, it is something that we're talking about. It goes from 687 to now 765. And again, pretty significant jump relative to the previous 4 years. So again, that's 70,000 and starts to build out the total of 325,000. The biggest one, quite honestly, and I'm surprised on it that we really have not talked about this one, which was the fine and forfeitures. This is primarily driven based on the staff report through red flex camera charges. It's $475,000 of revenue versus 583, or an increase of 100,000 in total. You know, if you read all of the information that's distributed in California on red flex cameras, the issues, people are realizing that they don't necessarily, the payment process in it is one that's questionable. I know that we did something as a city that was very unique, which is we had the police department go back and reassign reserve officers, or so that we can get past the, has somebody in PD actually evaluated the pictures taken and actually made the pronouncement so we could submit that to court. But I honestly, I don't know how this thing increases. You know, at some point, after 6 years, for some of us that have been on the council, the red flags are supposed to be a safety issue, not a revenue generation machine. So I think it sends a perception to the community that we may be trying to depend on this conditioned behavior to get worse over time. And again, unless we are changing the sensitivity on red flags to increase revenue, or people have just fully forgot and are losing their conditioning, I'm not sure how we get another $100,000 a year out of that. And I'm kind of curious on that one. Like, what was your assumption there?
There's been some discussions that there's more traffic because of what's going on with 405 too, coming in this direction. But we'll go through and show you the methodology in detail.
Okay. So at the highest level, now I just, Mayor, if you would just indulge me, I do want to address the 3 areas that we did talk about tonight, if that's
Sure.
okay. Staff report for this evening, as it talked about first time, the part-time COLA. And for the community that's watching this, what we're talking about is giving a pay increase to part-time employees of 2.5%. And kind of the justification that's used in the staff report is that, you know, we did something very similar to the rest of the employees, so we should do that to the to the folks that were part-time workers. It's impressive that we're able to run our city with 100 part-time people, 45,000 hours, all that. So the questions that I had asked, and I had called in before this meeting just as a courtesy to my colleagues to try to get these answers before. I was just trying to find out the differential of those 100 people that are part-time employees. How many are permanent part-time, like crossing guards, et cetera? How many of them are seasonal, like people that volunteer to do park work or the aquatics? Because it would be helpful to determine if they're seasonal. Majority of them are seasonal. I'm not sure why we'd give them a pay increase and send them on their way if we could hire them in next year at a higher rate. And I start to wonder if we don't have a policy problem versus a short-term pay. This type of solution focuses on fixing employees that are full-time. It takes the base of all the people, 100, across all the departments and says, we're just going to bump them up 2.5%, so that makes $17,000 or $14,000, where I would think you would go and say, policy-wise, for all these job descriptions that we hire for part-time, what is the range, and do we have enough width in the range for these part-time people to actually pay them more? And that's a city staff problem, not a policy problem. But if the ranges are exhausted and you can't go any further, then we need to change the ranges to help you as a council, as policymakers. Then I'd say the issue is we need to address the rate ranges, not the actual giving people spot increases as part-time workers. The other side of the argument is most of these people, if they are full-time, or if they are permanent part-time, meaning they just like working 20, 30 hours a week, 15 hours a week, and they've been with us 20 years, I could be supportive of this if that is kind of how we're trying to handle it, because they're never going to quit and come back. But then I would again challenge staff is, do you have the management tools, not at the policy level, but at the staff level, to be able to make a discretionary call to pay somebody more money if they're a part-time worker? They're not covered by collective bargaining units. They're not union represented. So I at least I don't think they are. Again, do all of that set up to the question of, I don't have enough information to make a decision on this, and if you can provide any insight tonight, if not, I'd like to be able to get some more information on the side.
We could do that. I don't think we're prepared right now.
Yeah, not tonight.
But the point you're trying to make, I understand as far as permanent versus seasonal.
Mhm.
Maybe we could look at that, because what prompted this was basically Police Department and Parks and Recreation. Again, Josh's 13th week, my 12th week, and we were listening to them about their frustration, because some people have lost some good people, and also there's been complaints. Some of them are, so we're trying to do, especially since it's been since 2006,
Mhm.
and the competition part of it. But what you're saying makes some sense, and then also maybe adding another range. That's we're just trying to, because I know Corey said he's lost 9 at one point, or had to hire 9, and some of these other, it's just, and then that takes their time trying to, and everybody else's time trying to recruit and interview and all these other things. But
When they're
those are
hired,
some valid
Are
points.
they put into, are they hired up through any of the collective bargaining units, or are they solely independent folks that are paid just hourly? So I mean, the question I have, and it's a policy issue.
Yeah, I don't
It's
see
either
that.
it's a range issue, or do you guys not have the authority as department heads or managers to just give a pay increase to somebody because you think that as a part-time worker, there's still a couple extra dollars in the range, so I'm just going to discretionarily move them up, and then you're going to go to Greg and say, Greg, in the next budget cycle, I was able to fit this in. Can we not do that?
Well, we'll look at it, and if not, we could make some changes, but I like the concept, especially, maybe recognizing the permanent. Of course, then the seasonal, because we're in competition with other cities, but we'll do a global research on all these
Okay.
issues, even if you have to add another range. That's another idea, too.
Okay. Next item, the business license position. So again, just the context of this, for me, when I look at it, I struggle for supporting it. We have 2 part-time people that support this function. We've utilized the backdrop of this as data, specifically a chart in the staff report that says business license tax history. And we show 2009 a drop of 32%, even though, like you said fairly, the economy's come down, et cetera. And we show it kind of go back up. So it kind of gets presented as this is a fix to protect revenue. But then further in the discussion, we say, well, look, during certain periods of time, this is sort of like your property tax. We only collect these once a year, and we only search for business tax or business license revenue when we think that there's a code enforcement issue and people aren't jumping in, or they come into the city mid-year. So I'd say 80–90% of this base of tax license fee, whatever you want to call it, is known and is collected one time. And you acknowledge that by saying, that's why we're calling it /clerk, because we're going to utilize this position for other areas. So again, in theory, this thing is taking 2 part-time people. Do those part-time people today get benefits?
No.
Okay, so now we're going to increase 1 more head count, add benefits on top of this. Of Corey, Josh, when we talked earlier, you said that you thought it was somewhere around $14,000 net increase in this. Were you able to confirm how much do we pay our part-time workers today?
We did an analysis of the full cost of the 2 receptionists. We pay them a total of $34,425. That includes their annual salary, their retirement, and because they are in PARS, and Medicare. And then we ran it also for the business license clerk, the proposed position, and it came to $48,108, including all benefits, for a difference of $13,683. And the business license clerk is at step A. The receptionist we used for this comparison, one was at B and one was at A, so there could be a slight differential there.
Now, one of them came over recently from Parks and Recreation, and she's going back to Parks and Recreation, right? So then we're going to another opening. So then getting a new person and having them do business licenses, that was the concern because of the amount of revenue, and then seeing what dipped, because it's our understanding they cut that position some years ago, but if it's a problem, we could cut it out.
Well,
We don't have to propose it, we'll get another new person and see how it goes. It's just that's just a lot of money it's a concern to see that type of a dip. It's kind of startling.
Who management-wise, does this function fall under department head?
Falls under me.
Okay. The second part of this just as a clarification, then you have on the staff report, the business license online payment software, which totally, this sounds like a great idea to streamline the process of collecting fees on an annual basis. And that efficiency seems like it would even further reduce the need for a full-time person, but wouldn't help you with the institutional knowledge that you're trying to duplicate. But then as we talked about this earlier, you had mentioned that this isn't actually in the budget. But for the public who reads this, it kind of looks like you're explaining both of these and they're actually in the budget. But I just wanted to make a clarification that this was an idea. Did this come up as an action item and in the previous discussion?
Yeah, there was discussion about what it would cost and what it could do if we got an online payment software.
Okay.
We could reconsider it and take it into the context of the full-time versus the part-time.
It all seems
Reevaluate that.
related to me,
All
but
right.
and by the way, good idea.
We'll do it.
The last area is the fund balance, and I actually, I don't have any, and I'm going to save the rest till after everybody else has a shot. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Edgar. Questions from anybody else? So, I'm sorry, so,
No,
John,
go ahead. I only
if you
have
can
one.
just kind of go over that number again that Troy brought up about the 2 part-time versus the 1 full-time. The difference is 13,000, but I didn't really get clearly in which way. Is it
13,000 more.
more? Okay,
$13,683 more.
more. And that includes, that accounts for the benefits because of the full-time position?
Full cost.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions?
I just have one real quick. Under Los Alamitos Boulevard rehab designation, we show 100,000 being spent in capital projects. Are those designated for specific projects like we discussed at the last meeting, or is it just a general set aside?
That initial amount would be to complete any outreach necessary, design work necessary, and engineering necessary to continue with the project. You actually wouldn't see construction in this first year.
Thanks. That's the only question I have.
Richard, any questions?
I have a question. I almost hate to bring it up, but I don't understand what this stuff is doing in our meeting today, quite frankly. We're supposed to be having a special meeting about the budget. We've got a lot of issues on the budget that are up in the air, but we're not addressing any of them. But we're talking about 3 new $14,000 items. We're having a special meeting for that. It just doesn't make sense to me. I have a lot of questions about the budget, but we're not talking about that. I can't imagine that in June, when we scheduled the special meeting for June the 3rd to discuss the budget, that these are the type of items we were going to be discussing. We have $100,000 swings on the budget that we need to iron out between us all, and hopefully reach an agreement. They're not impossible, but that's where I thought we'd be discussing today. I mean, I got the staff report, I read it, actually spent most of my time with the old staff report trying to come up with the budget, and if it takes another special meeting next week to actually be prepared and discuss the budget, I'd be more than willing to show up for that.
Okay. Do you have questions of past information that was provided to us?
I have questions. Troy took all the good ones, really, but when you're discussing the numbers, all the same things stand out to everybody, so, but that's just how he is, so.
Well,
Thank
so the city manager is going to go off and I guess, provide information, right? They did some analysis, but.
But for example, we know that the community give back is not $354,000. We know the maximum it can be is $114,000. That money should be going back in the budget. We know, for example, that the business plan, the business rebate plan, is only going to cost us about, I think, 10 to 20 now, but I thought it was 40. But somewhere $120,000 to $140,000 should be going back into the budget, okay? We have several items. Now, I realize the pool item's up in the air, but the generator, we're spending $100,000 of our money. Not to include that in the overall discussion and claim that we have a $9,000 surplus doesn't make sense to me. And that's really what I thought we were coming here.
That money would be taken out of, again, like, excuse me.
That's all right.
Where it showed that there was, in addition to the surplus, but in past years, there's been balances, and so that's what went into those. So that's what is being paid for that. And it's like an emergency, like when you have an emergency fund, the generator is being perceived as an emergency. If it goes down, police department's a 24/7 operation. So that's basically what our thought process is on this. This is an emergency, and those are funds that, or extra funds that the city accrued in past years. More than that, it was actually over $1 million, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So there's plenty available for that. So that's
And Greg, I
taken care
don't
of.
disagree with the generator at all.
Right. Okay.
But it is coming out of, there's a lot of fund accounting drives the CPAs nuts. I can't imagine somebody with a passing interest actually figuring it out. But in the end, it comes out of our pocket. No matter where it comes from or if it's been saved for in the past, we're spending $100,000 that we're not going to then we're not budgeting for. We're spending $100,000 out of reserves, I guess, is my overall complaint. And I think we should be a break-even city, protect our reserves as they are, and save them for an unforeseen emergency. To me, an emergency is not something that you've needed for I don't know how long. We've known we needed a generator. But in my mind, the generator, and it should be approved, but it should be offset by other items either not getting paid for or not being included in the budget. As it turns out, most of the offsets that I have, they end up within $1,000 of each other. But they needed to be discussed. Troy has some other questions that I didn't have, like the property tax. I could see maybe with a lot of home sales and a 2% increase, I thought maybe 3%, 4 was a little high, but it's not outrageous. The franchise fee is all in the cable. The increase in the cable is $38,000. It's the only one that increases. And maybe we could explain that one. And I have the same concern on the red light that are we gonna? I don't want to count on money we're not going to get. And finally, the plan check item we're increasing it roughly $70,000 this year. Okay, I think that's a one-time thing. And I'm very concerned that we're gonna budget to spend things, to spend that money, because it's been my experience that when government puts something in the budget, it never comes out. So whatever goes in there that gets paid for by the $69,000, next year, we don't have it. Okay?
Councilmember, there's also an expectation with the hospital that there'll be an increase in utility taxes. There's going to be, extra utilities generated, the parking structures, and everything else. So that may be, you can't, it's, this is a guide right now, but it's very possible that that could replace that source of revenue.
And that's what I started to say, is that's what I saw this meeting as, is a discussion of what everybody sees the variables as. I mean, 99% of this we agree on, because it's just kind of set. It's the other little bit that gets all the attention. And that's where I thought our time should be spent, was making sure, maybe who agrees with Troy that 117,000 on property taxes is too high, or what is the number that we think, maybe if it is too high? What are we willing to live with that we're gonna spend? I guess is really my concern. And I had the same thing with the occupancy tax at $13,000. Like I said, the cable franchise fee goes up $38,000. I would assume the cable franchise fee going up is a simple explanation. But and then, like I said, plan check really bothers me, because it's a one-time increase for a huge project. And to set our budget based upon that, I just think sets us up down the road to fail. That we're not gonna have this money in the subsequent years. Okay, and one final thought. In going over this, we don't even at all discuss the police budget, but the police budget has gone up 17% in 2 years, okay? We haven't had inflation in 2 years, but I'd at least like to know what the explanation of why it went up. I realize that the SRO accounts for $100,000, but even taking the SRO out of the increase, I'm at 15.5% over 2 years, including 6.8% this year. I don't think we can sustain that. And that's the type of questions I was hoping we were going to be discussing tonight.
Talk about
The
that.
SR is, at, I believe, 200,000.
Well, we're getting 100 back, though.
Right, but we're budgeting for the full cost.
Okay.
The revenue's
I'll
budgeted
be
on
doing
the
my
other
math.
side.
right.
And I believe the increases were MOU increases that were agreed. Contracts
Okay.
from several years back. Yeah, and the garage fund.
Yeah, okay.
That's the part that's confusing, because now the garage fund's done differently.
Yeah, the garage fund, you want me to just keep going here?
Yeah.
The garage fund, I have to admit, I'm confused. Okay, the notes today talk about garage fund having $85,000 for salaries and benefits. My understanding, and believe me, the odds are I'm wrong here, my understanding of the garage fund was it was a way to take money from every department to replace the vehicles, their share of what happened over the years. I didn't understand at all where salaries come into replacing vehicles.
It's the maintenance of the vehicles as well, and that's the salary of our mechanic
Okay,
that works on the vehicle.
Okay, so
And then
my-
also fuel costs are in there as well.
so my understanding of the garage fund isn't complete,
Right.
to me the benefit of the doubt. Okay, well, I will study it some more with you on
Yeah,
the side.
Call me in.
Okay, okay, then that's all I have.
Thanks, Richard.
You're welcome.
Dean, any questions?
I have to agree with both of them. The questions that I have, it looks like we're spending down, to call it a balanced budget, we're spending down the reserves. And the idea that we're projecting more revenue coming in without substantiating it in the process is concerning as well. I'm concerned about the $250,000 that was spent on accounting software and all of the different modules that were supposed to go. I realize we've had staff changes, but what have we gotten from the standpoint of that investment based on what was said, what was presented to council, and where we are today? The idea that we've got to go spend another 20 grand to automate, to do this online from the standpoint of collecting, there's a lot of different things that the city is collecting money on. They have it in Parks and Recreation right now where you can register online for programs, and you can't renew your business license online, and you can't pay fees online. There's something wrong. It's like looking at every single issue is brand new, and it's got to have a different solution. And I don't understand that. I don't know whether it's part of the funds that are there. I mentioned before I have an issue with the 2 part-time positions going to a full-time position, because it is going to cost us benefits. And if you look at the chart that you provided, you know, in 2009-10 is when it took the dip. And then all of a sudden, miraculously, it bounces back up 22%. We've still got 2 part-time people, or did we have 1 full-time? And you know, the idea that we lost a person, so we lose institutional knowledge. Institutional knowledge is great, but I'm not sure that we really are retaining it at clerk levels. In my experience on the council in the past, we're not. And that's more where the department heads fit into the picture from the standpoint and the supervisor level from the standpoint of institutional knowledge. I don't know that we can anticipate we hire 1 person full-time that's going to regain revenue. There was some discussion that at one point the code enforcement officer might be involved in some of the business license activities. Those are things that are more operational and not so much policy as I understand it. For us, it's you guys have got X amount of money. You need to figure out how you're going to use that X amount of money to the best advantage to accomplish the goals that are set out. And I don't want to get down to the point where we're looking at that and saying, well, why don't you do this versus that? That's what we hire professionals for, I think, to do. And I'm not happy from the standpoint of the business license position and the additional costs it's going to take to automate. Because we talked about that automation back when I was on council, you know, prior to 2009. And here we are 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road, and we're still discussing it. We made no effort, no opportunity in the process. I think, again, like was said about the garage fund, we've taken what was originally just replacement costs, that was my understanding, for mechanical things. To me, gasoline and mechanics wages and things like that is part of an operational thing. It's not part of vehicle replacement. It's kind of like the old technology fund. You've got X amount of money to buy a computer, but we're not paying for the computer programming and licensing and all of that kind of stuff out of that fund. It's a equipment replacement type fund. So some of these have changed, and I know there was a change occurred when I was off council, but it would help from my perspective just to have a better understanding and knowledge over that. And in the staff report where it talks about the garage fund, on the very last page, it references the 10 fund, which I guess is the garage fund. City manager and finance, the biggest chunk, 228,000 is in police. I had asked at one point, in fact, I've asked, I think, twice now, about what do we have in the way of mechanical equipment? What do we have that's included from the standpoint of a vehicle fleet, things of that nature? We went through a policy here recently that talked about replacement time frame, but where are the vehicles in relationship to that? Because when I was on council before, we bought 6 cars, all in 1 year. It was 2 different budget years, but it was all in 1 year. And prior to that time, as I recall, we were doing 2 cars a year. And all of a sudden, it got bumped up to 3. We had 2 of them that were totaled in accidents, which meant it had to be replaced again. But realistically, what are we looking at from the standpoint of the total fleet? We've done some recent replacement of Parks and Recreation, or maybe it's Public Works vehicles. I just don't understand it, I guess, enough to feel comfortable with where we are on it. And I agree with Richard. I think that was the purpose of tonight's meeting, was really to get down to the nitty-gritty, resolve some of the things that have been discussed at the prior 2 meetings that we've had on the budget, and fine-tune it so that when we get here on the 17th, we're not going to spend 2 or 3 or 4 hours going through trying to figure out and identify priorities in that particular process. So I'll just pass it back, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Do you have more questions for us?
Are you okay?
Okay.
Okay. At a lower level, if we're going to have another breakout, if you look at the May 6th staff report, which is kind of our base reference, I just would request that City Council has 3 direct reports. As the council, we have city manager, city attorney, and city clerk. I would just ask that the city clerk budget in the detail is broken out from underneath the city manager side. So if you go, for example, to attachment 2, and it's not going to be a huge revelation, but I think in the just terms of accountability, we've really tried. I know Jerry and I've kind of went back and forth on focusing on trying to provide the right level of resource and focus there. And I think it's good for us visibility-wise to get an idea of what one of our direct reports cost. So I'd like to be able to see on attachment 2 under general fund, city manager, it's a breakout. I believe that's where we've put the city clerk. At least I'd put that up for consideration. The other item, Chief, when we were going through the discussion, I don't like to bring problems without potential solutions, or at least I don't concerns without a potential solution. We talked around 2 or 3 potential options if we are over forecasted on revenue, or we reach a compromise on what that revenue projection should be. But one of the things that you made a statement on was the SRO officer and whether the funding level, whether it was at 290 and I thought when we went through, there was some sort of an agreement that we would actually budget that less or be able to cut back or something. Do you remember that at all? I don't see it in any of the notes for this meeting, but I did have it, just some notes in the original. I don't know if anybody else has anything on that.
I'm not sure I understand your questions. About, it was, 190 is what we originally projected. But your question is?
Well, it was, 190 was the projection, but we approved 90. Although we were hearing now that we've actually might have approved 190. So I thought what we said is that we would actually go back and evaluate that differential. And I said, I thought I'd ask you, hey, can you live with this? And I thought you said, yeah, I can. And maybe I'm off. And if not, maybe that's a follow-up. We can go back to the tape outside of here, because I don't want to get into it here. But I just would like to get clarification on what I thought we agreed to.
I remember you asked me if we could absorb it.
Okay.
And I certainly did not commit to that. And I think where we left it was you asked if I would go back and look to see if we could absorb it or at least half of it. Okay. And I never did commit to that because, we did look at that and based on what we're committed to right now with our core services, our answer would be no.
Okay. So
I recall that too. I wasn't officially hired, but I was in the audience that night, and I did attend the staff meeting the next day.
Okay.
It was like the best efforts, so they did look at it, was my recollection.
Yeah, okay. So one of the things, I guess I'll put it up there. I guess I didn't have the understanding that we'd reached an agreement at the table. I thought it might be still an open thing that you were going to go back and then we could actually document for posterity of, hey, this is what we've agreed to. Something, and maybe to pick up a little bit on what Rich is saying, we have a lot of different commissions in the city that look at a lot of different things. One of the areas that we have the biggest expenditure is in the police budget. And it was an item that we did talk about very quickly. And, we've characterized it as garage fund problem, SRO issue, and a collective bargaining unit. Those are kind of the highlights of really over the last 2 years has been an $800,000 increase for a lot of different reasons. I have longer term concerns of what is our police department going to look like in 3 to 5 years. We've got a succession issue where we'll, Chief, I know we're hoping you're going to be here for 20 years, but at some point that's going to run out. We see turnover in some of the top folks that are getting ready to retire. And it all relates back to budget is what is our police department going to look like in the future? And, we're worried about organizational memory at the clerk level on business licenses, yet our biggest expenditure is this. So one of the things that I would ask that we potentially take under consideration as an outshoot of this to give me some, comfort on more detail is being focused on the police side is maybe we should think about assigning a commission or some sort of a combination of a ad hoc group in the future to take a look so that we can more closely look at this. The direction that I sense that we're going is that the infrastructure to maintain our police department for a city of our size is starting to outsize itself, from my perspective, and it's directionally leading towards a future council potentially needing to deal with, are we too small of a city to have our own police department? And we need to fight as a council to make sure that doesn't become a reality through the budgeting process, that we can't afford it, not that because our community wants it. So I think that we need to find a way, if this isn't the mechanism that we can get into the details, I really do believe that it would be good for us to consider some way because I think it involves the community of getting a group together that really takes a look at, what is the performance of what we can provide, what is the cost structure. If we're growing by 800,000 over the last 2 years, 17% increase, we cannot sustain that, and we're going to have to make some hard decisions that will affect the community because revenue is not growing that fast. So that would just be something I would put out for consideration. And I think the last item that I had was something we haven't talked about at all tonight was the field fees. We're getting ready to vote in a couple weeks on increases to field fees in our community. At the same time, we're saying at a community give back, we're done with that. We gave it a good shot. We did the things we did, but the community is tremendously outreaching to council members right now, concerned that their kids might have a hard time paying these field fees. Corey, I talked to you about this earlier. Just for the community's sake, we've reached an agreement, at least at the school board, that's been a compromise. The council isn't fully aware of it. The only reason I want to talk about this is the night where we're actually trying to give you guys things to look at before our final budget discussion, unless we have a special meeting. Here's the statistics of the data. The field fee, as it's presented, has two components. It has the user amounts that the people will have to pay on an ongoing basis to keep the maintenance up, and it has a CIP amount. And the CIP amount, eventually the city's going to have to pick up a third of that. And a third of that we don't pick up today would be about $25,000 to $115,000 a year. And we aren't complaining about it yet because we might have ways to generate revenue, either increasing recreation fees. But when I look at when we're getting ready to set a policy on our fund balance and put things away for OPED and all these other things, we have a real thing coming that we're going to have to start paying. If you believe the staff report that went to Parks and Recreation Commission for Wednesday, that amount that they're trying to plan for eventually comes to a fully funded $325,000 a year CIP amount that's shared by everybody, that eventually generates $30 million worth of a CIP project that dwarfs our CIP projects. And we ought to be thinking about maybe if we're looking at ways to start saving for that how do we deal with this with the community? Because we haven't gotten our dose of the community yet. The commission did, the school board did, we're about ready to, and we were looking at it financially. From your perspective, can you just give us just a really quick briefing on where you think the field fees will be, and will there be an impact to our budget as we get ready? Because you really won't get an impact update till Wednesday, but we're here tonight. Can I just ask you for just a quick update?
Thank you, Councilmember. The field fees that will be coming, that have been published in the newspaper and that will be coming to you for decision at the public hearing on the 17th, do include both revenue and expenditure that will affect the city. The numbers as far as they're generated, and basically it will cost, there'll be additional expenditures in the range of anywhere between $60,000 to $85,000, $90,000 a year for the ongoing maintenance at a higher level than what we're offering now. A lot of this has to do with increasing the number of times that Public Works mows or aerates a field, potentially increasing the amount of water that the fields get, so on and so forth. Obviously, a lot of it ranges based upon Mother Nature. In addition to that, there will be an increase of revenue based on the new higher field fees. That revenue will approximately cover approximately 1/3 of that, so about $20,000 of, let's say, $60,000 of expenditures. So that will leave the city to cover again about 1/3 of those costs, and that's the ongoing routine maintenance at again a higher level than what we're currently maintained at, in order to keep the parks like McAuliffe and like Laurel looking like them, rather than resorting back to what Oak looks like now. That's one aspect. The other aspect, like you said, is the capital improvement fund. The way that was structured was the goal is to, again, in theory, raise about $350,000 annually. It's about $5,000 per acre per year, and we have collectively between the city and the school district about 70 acres to maintain. And that $5,000 annually set aside per acre will allow us, over the course of 30 years, which is what's considered a lifespan of a field. At the end of 30 years, basically, we would be able to take all of that money collectively and rehabilitate all of our fields. We know that we're not going to wait 30 years to rehab 70 acres and do it all in one fell swoop, but that's the concept of it. The new guidelines that the school district just passed, that again was a compromise with the user groups that vocalized their opinion and said this is all too much too quickly, was rather than $10 times the activity weighting scale per season would be reduced down to $2 per person times the activity weighting scale per season for the first year, and then $4 the second year, and so on and so forth, all the way till 2018, when it gets to $10 per person times the weighting scale for the 10 years. So in theory, if the city and school district match those fees, again, rough estimate, you're talking around $25,000 to $30,000 that the city would need to put away into capital improvement the first year, although the first fiscal year would only be 6 months because it doesn't start until January 1. And then from then it would increase up till in 2018. Again, in theory, the user groups have that $350,000. The user groups would be contributing 115, the school district 115, and the city 115. And where we're going to go after this is deciphering where we're going to get that money and how much we can raise fees and still remain competitive with all of our programs, and where we may need to seek additional revenues or things of that note to continue to contribute to that CIP to in order to continue matching that third.
Great. Corey, thank you. That was a great explanation. And I think how it relates specifically to our budget discussion is I think there's a couple things that we could consider that, and I think from where Corey's at, probably we wouldn't need to, but short term this year, we're going from 20 to about 65,000 for maintenance fees across all user groups. So there's a $45,000 differential. So when I started kind of contemplating, I know Jerry and I have been kind of going back and forth on what is going to end up happening with the community give back. And you think about $45,000 as a fee holiday, or at least potentially a contribution into that services. How many participants do we have in parks in these? I mean, it's got to be probably 10,000 people, 10,000 participants.
It's probably between 6,000 and 7,000.
6 and 7. So
at least in the youth groups that we analyze, obviously there are still more groups that aren't incorporated here, but they're much smaller.
yeah. Now I listened to Rich very carefully, so I know he isn't fully there as far as filling holes with reserve money, and I respect that. But I think we haven't gotten our dose of the community's view of the fees, and we are in the, all I've seen is our chairman of our Parks and Recreation Committee get up and, not get up, actually put a statement out that she wasn't super supportive. I've seen a very respected member on our commission that's very tied into the field say he's not supportive. So one of the tools in our toolbox as a council that we may or may not want to look at as potential opportunity is the $46,000 potential subsidy for maintenance fees would ease the burden. As long as the community accepted the fee increase, we would be able to prolong that portion. And people might not be on board, but I'm just saying these are things that we need to think about because we're going to deal with this issue coming up. On the capital improvement side, we got a long road to hoe between now and $350,000. So that one, when we have an excess amount, do we worry about putting money into that from the reserves or not? Somehow we're going to have to be able to pay our amount. And so I don't know, even in this budget where we've ended up theoretically $10,000 in excess, where do we get 115? So with those things, I guess I just wanted to bring up the fees since it's a glaring community issue. It's not been talked about in our budget, and I just wanted to see if any of the other council members have any thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, could I kind of reflect on that a little bit? Because I went to the hearing that the school district had, workshop that they had, and staff was there, and then I went to the meeting the night that they adopted the fees on the 21st of May. I'm glad that they took the initial lead, and I will tell you that I think the groups that were there, although it was primarily AYSO, Friday Night Lights was not there, reacted appreciative that their needs were listened to. Pop Warner was there, and I think he's the one that carried the heavier stick with the superintendent, because originally her plan was to split it 5 and 5. And he came in and met with her, and I believe her comment was that there were limited people that actually came in and met with her, but she made her door wide open for anybody that wanted to. And that she listened to what he had to say and understood, and then came back to the school board with a recommendation of $2 a year for the next 5 years, which really changed the whole dynamics of that CIP fund, and the knowledge from the standpoint of how that's going to get raised and where it's going to wind up being used. There are still some devil in the details aspect from the standpoint of the city that are going to have to be worked out, but I got the impression after that particular meeting, and I've not had any more phone calls or any more emails, that they were more comfortable with the resolution that the school board did, to the point where we should be able to act on it with minimal amount of change and influence at this point. Again, I think the details are going to be when we do come down to the actual field use policies that still have to be kind of ferreted out and decided upon. There's still a lot of questions yet in terms of where does the money come from, like you've mentioned. But I think we've made a good major step in equalizing out both what the actual costs of the services are that are provided. It's very hard to argue with the numbers that they've come up with. The process that they went through in terms of determining the capital use. If it turns out 5 years from now that fund is bigger than our budget, for example, I think there's going to be a point at that particular stage where we talk about it. There's still some concern, as I understand, with who manages that fund. And I believe that's part of the situation the city has as well. Who collects the money? The school board believes they're collecting the money and that they're going to set up a separate line item fund that will be very transparent for everybody to see. I'm listening to the groups, though, saying we've got a 1/3 choice in how that money is spent. And operationally, they don't own the property. And they don't really make those kinds of policies in the process. Again, between the school district and the city, carrying 2/3 of the weight, for a policy standpoint, we should be able to resolve it. But it is going to be an issue to deal with down the road. But initially getting this process started, I think we're on a good forward movement. And I don't anticipate that we're going to have that kind of outcry. I do understand that the commission on Wednesday is going to relook at it and make a decision from the standpoint of whether they stay the course with the original position that they were opposed to. And when you get to that I don't want to prejudge what's going to happen on Wednesday, but I do think we have an incorrect mix relative to our commissioners that are on that commission. One of the questions we asked was, can you make decisions based on the best knowledge from the standpoint of the entire community as opposed to your individual biases? And we asked that of every commissioner really in the interview process. I don't think that's happened. I think the individual biasness of those that are on the commissions for whatever groups they happen to be there representing led that commission at the last meeting to make the decisions that they did and overpowered some of those who just didn't have a position in the process. So as we move forward on some of this, I really question whether having those types of individuals on the commission that have strong leadership roles with the various groups is a wise choice in representing the broad base of the community, because they do tend to make their decisions based on what their individual desires and needs are. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
I'll go real quick. Corey, generally, and I think I remember seeing an email, doesn't the city's fees mirror what the school district does? Didn't I receive a email? There was a question saying, do we charge the same as the school district? Is that common?
For field rental? Yes.
Okay. So is it safe to say that generally speaking, and there's obviously no decision made ahead of time, but that we would continue that same process moving forward?
Correct.
Okay. That's all I have.
Thank you. Richard, anything else? I think I'm done too. So, well, with that, I'll open it up for public comment. So any members of the public wishing to speak on this item, please come forward and identify yourselves. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close public comment. And I think this comes back to us. I think this is just receive and file, right?
Right.
So any other thoughts, questions from the council?
I think we're requesting a special meeting, budget meeting before the next
Okay.
regular meeting. Is that correct?
So we are asking for another budget meeting.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think there were some questions from Councilmember Edgar and Councilmember Murphy, and I'm looking at the staff. Is it clear? So what it is we want to
Yes,
see?
what we'll do this time is we'll memorialize this. We'll respond with a written report. That's not what we did last time. And so we'll respond with a written report, itemize every concern, and address every concern, and that's how we'll respond on this.
And then, just interrupting Richard, can you run through the concern that you have that you're going to address, and then, did you have something else you want to say, Richard?
No, I was just, let me refer back to the May the 6th meeting, okay? It says in the first paragraph, the schedule, to be followed by a third budget study session scheduled for June 3rd, which will address any revisions and follow-up items resulting from the first two meetings. Is that what we did tonight?
That's what we felt we were doing.
Okay, I would 100% disagree that we haven't brought any revisions forward, and it doesn't, that's why I asked we have a spreadsheet that we can play with that, you know, put stuff in and take stuff out.
Josh, do
And-
you have your spreadsheet?
I mean, I guess at this point, I can't imagine us being ready in a
Understood.
council meeting to, unless we have a 4-hour, one-item discussion of being ready to finalize the budget without bringing up any more questions than we are at the time.
Understood. So they have the list of actions so far. Let's get a summary to make sure that they're going to address the ones that you've got. I think Troy had enumerated a few, so make sure they capture them.
Okay.
And then I think in terms of the spreadsheet, city manager, is it okay that can that be emailed out to us? So I think that'll facilitate being able to look at the numbers and play the what if scenarios.
And may I ask to the will of the council, if your questions are answered sufficiently by staff before the next special meeting, is there a need for a special meeting? Do you think they need to be further discussed, or are they things that the informational only?
Honestly, I would welcome the debate, because I don't
Okay.
think you guys are going to agree with me.
I agree, because so much of the stuff is subjective, and, you know, I'm only one voice, and would actually look to see what my colleagues say, you know. We're projecting the property taxes for next year. If I could sit here and do that, I'd be worth millions, you know. It's a guess, it's an educated guess, but we have to agree that this is our best educated guess, so.
Right.
You know, just because if I call Josh and he gives me a good answer, and I agree, it doesn't mean that everybody else would, so it'd be
Right.
hard to do that.
Just as a point of reference, and because I had some of the same questions when I first came on, Richard, and you have a lot more experience with this, but in past budget meetings, Troy has also asked that he thought the projected revenues were too low, so to look at it and bring them up so that it didn't have a deficit. Do you remember that when Nita was here? So I just want us to be very careful. We hire the people who are the experts. This is what they do, not to, like Dean will say sometimes, micromanage them too much. I mean, obviously, we have to ask the questions. That's our job. But let's just make sure that we're not trying to hold a heavy hand over them to get them to do what we feel is right. We need to go with what they say, and then at mid-year, we can readdress it if we need to.
Okay.
That's all I ask.
Okay, so back to city manager, recap the items to
Okay.
address for the next special meeting.
Okay. Basically, what I have is, we were talking about the COLA. We were talking about reviewing the part-time fund balances. Richard talked about the business rebate, community giveaway. There was also talk about the TOT tax, franchise fees, cable fees, police department. Dean talked about accounting software, Parks and Recreation has software, so that we will look at software for the business license, the garage fund, go back through the May 6 staff reports. There was also discussion regarding Troy brought up about the budgets where the city clerk and city manager direct reports. Then we started talking about the recreation fees, but that's a different matter. And then we'll start off tomorrow with the with all this in our staff meeting. There's also discussion about the red light cameras too.
And the property tax.
Property tax, yes.
So, yeah, there was the three revenues, I think, Troy, the property tax, the transient occupancy tax, and was it the
The franchise fee.
yeah, the franchise fee for the TUT, so those are the things I think to bring back. If you
Right.
can, I guess sooner to provide that, I think it would be better if you can just do that, not wait till this next meeting. I think we're going to plan to meet next week then, is that,
Next
did we
week
say the-
is planning.
Didn't we say before the next regular meeting,
for the next regular, okay.
which would be the 17th or the 20th?
The next regular meeting's on the 17th, so it doesn't give us much time. So we have basically 2 weeks, and we have a lot of questions still. That's what I think we're at. so.
It may not work for Monday is the problem.
Okay. Well, we'll look for the calendar, see what we could come up with, and as Wendy does, and then she sends it to all of you to
Right, well,
do it for a special meeting.
Okay. But does that pretty much address everybody's concerns? And if there's something else, just please, by all means, I think, just send an email to city manager and to Josh. Okay? And then so, right now, we're planning to meet one more time before the meeting on the 17th, the hearing, and have all these answers, at least all these concerns addressed. Okay? With that, any other questions? Okay? Any other reports?
Nope.
Okay, we'll go ahead and just close this meeting, adjourn it to the next special meeting. Thank you all.